Our next business item, which is an action item, is to review the work of the NPC Committee on Emergency Preparedness, discuss their findings and recommendations, and to vote on their proposed final report as the Council's response to the Secretary's request on this item. Again, you'll see, and I know many of you have reviewed, also many of you have been a part of this study. It, again, is another very extensive study, and many of you have provided a lot of outstanding leadership as well as a lot of commitments of your personal time as well as resources of your organization to bring this report forward. It is an important issue as we look at how we can better, in a coordinated fashion, respond to emergencies that impact our energy infrastructure in this country. Marvin Odom chairs our Committee on Emergency Preparedness, and he's going to kick off the presentation of the results of this comprehensive study. So I'll turn it over to you, Marvin.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, everyone. Well, I have a slightly more formal part of the meeting today. So with that, I'd like to formally bring the MPC study on emergency preparedness to the Council for their consideration and, of course, their approval. Now, before we get to the details of the study, I want to recognize the work that's been done by the study team, and in particular, the collaboration and support provided by the Department of Energy participants. It's clear to the MPC study team that this subject has been given a very high priority within the DOE, and significant resources are being dedicated to emergency preparedness. I want to also recognize the other members of the Executive Committee for the precious time and energy that they committed to this study. That's Alan Armstrong of Williams, Gary Heminger of Marathon Petroleum, Jim Hackett, Chair of the MPC, of course, Chuck Davidson, Vice Chair of MPC, and Bill White, Chairman of Lazard in Houston, who certainly brought his own hard-earned experience to our study. Now, for the record, the draft report was provided electronically to all members of the Council on December the 2nd. The draft report has been reviewed and supported by the study's coordinating subcommittee, the Executive Committee, and the Study Committee. Now, looking at the recommendations, there's just a few reflections that I'd like to share before I hand over to Peggy Montana to take you into some of the details. Now, first, this study purposefully focused not on the incident management that happens at a local level, but on the mechanisms to improve the management of issues that result from the cascading effects of significant events. As we all know, the impacts from a natural disaster can have far-reaching effects. Bringing the full, well-organized, and practiced capability of the federal, state, and industry resources to assist can greatly improve the effectiveness and the speed of the recovery. Therefore, this study focused on improving the communication and the coordination between the industry and government at the federal and state levels, which in turn will enable better support at the local level. Now, second, the recommendations are not particularly groundbreaking. So why is that? I think it was telling that in the review of previous incidents and other studies that have taken place on this topic, repeatedly they had very similar findings, and some of those show up yet again in this study. Now, basic emergency response techniques and approaches are a well-understood science. However, it's often the human and organizational dynamics that can make emergency response go well or not. Therefore, a key feature of the study recommendations is a focus on putting together a sustainable platform which, if implemented well, can withstand changes in administration, in personnel, and of course, industry dynamics. As Chuck Davidson noted in our last study committee meeting, the answer here is in the implementation. We know the scenarios and the players will be different each time. And it is our emphasis, and our emphasis, of course, is on what we do as an industry, together with the government, and after this report comes out, that's going to make the major difference. Now, the recommendations provide us a starting point, or what I like to call the structure or the backbone, to discover all those things that we didn't know and that we won't know until we implement, practice, learn, and improve. And the key element here, as so often is the case, is leadership in both government and industry to commit to full implementation of the recommendations. Therefore, it's not only your understanding and support for this study that I'm asking for today, but your individual and your organization's commitment to implement these recommendations. To that end, the last item in the report out that you will see today will be an outline of the proposed implementation plan. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Peggy Montana, who will take you through some of the details of the study. Peggy is the CEO of our newly formed midstream MLP, amongst many other things at Shell. Peggy?
Thanks, Marvin. So let me go ahead and start with the Secretary's request. The Secretary asked that we identify vulnerabilities in the U.S. infrastructure revealed by recent storm events, legal, procedural, and physical gaps that need to be addressed to improve the response, strategies to increase energy system resilience, and actions to address interdependencies. With that request, we then developed the scope of the study. The scope was approved by the NPC in January of this year. The study was focused on significant disruptions from natural disasters, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. We did exclude disruptions caused by sabotage or cyber attacks. In addition, hardening of assets was explicitly excluded from the scope of this report. The DOE topics of interest were then categorized into 3 study areas. These study areas focused on identifying what's needed by government and industry to improve interactions, to prepare and respond to emergencies, with particular attention to putting in place an institutional framework. As well, data, technology, and other capabilities that are pivotal to the response effort in order to assess damage and then support informed decision-making. And legal, procedural, or physical challenges that need to be addressed to improve response, particularly those around waivers. To address this scope, the organizational structure was formed. We put together 4 subgroups to support the coordinating subcommittee: analysis and planning, communication and information management, oil and natural gas supply chains, and legal and regulatory. Each of these subgroups worked very hard to ensure that the study areas were well covered. And my sincere thanks to Paula Gant, my co-chair, and the leaders of these groups, specifically Keith Robeson from Marathon, Bill Lawson from Williams, Robin Rourke from the API, and Jan Mayers from Resources for the Future. Special thanks also goes to the analysis and planning subgroup members from ExxonMobil, Shell, and Kinder Morgan, as well as the DOE, who were instrumental in driving and utilizing their leadership to deliver the study. In terms of the study approach, there were 2 main components. The first was a thorough review of the after-action reports and key studies that have been done in this area. And we use the nomenclature after action in the report, but it simply means a formal review of an incident after the fact to review what happened and to make recommendations for improvement. The consolidation of the findings and recommendations from looking at the after-action reports and the key studies highlighted very common themes and repetitive recommendations. This process really helped us to recognize that it's really about implementation rather than identifying new and different things that need to be done. The second component was a series of engagement sessions to get the benefit of the experience and the knowledge that was out there from the people who had been through these events. These sessions included multiple levels of government, local, state, and federal, as well as a broad spectrum of industry and other stakeholders. As you can see here, we had representation from 8 cabinet agencies, and the state governments were well represented as well. We also had very good participation from the utilities at both the engagement sessions and within the coordinating subcommittee, and their participation was particularly helpful, particularly in addressing interdependencies. So I thank them for their inputs. In addition to the large representation from the oil and gas industry, we also had very good participation from other CSC members, which included academia as well. And then unique to this study, we also engaged with the Oil and Natural Gas Sector Coordinating Council, or what we'll call in the rest of the report, ONG-SCC. I have to tell you that for myself and for most members of the coordinating subcommittee, we were not aware of this organization before the study. But in fact, it's a group that was established in 2004, and the current membership of the ONG-SCC is 23 trade associations. And it is a focal point organization to address security strategies, policies, and communication between the DHS, the DOE, and industry. And this group was established primarily for security, but it also provides a means to improve some preparedness and communication processes. Fortunately for this study, Keith Robeson is not only a member of the coordinating subcommittee and leading one of the subgroups, he also happens to be the current chair of the Oil and Natural Gas Sector Coordinating Council, so we chose well. But his participation has been invaluable in terms of linking the efforts of that group with the recommendations of this report. So let me move to the findings. The findings were developed on the basis of the review of the after-action report, the outputs from the engagement sessions, and the work of the subgroups. And a number of reoccurring issues and challenges were identified. We saw first that an understanding of the oil and natural gas supply chains were critical. As an example, when a Gulf Coast hurricane can hit, the fact that it can have immediate impact on other areas such as Georgia and Baltimore needs to be understood by others that are dealing with the industry. And people engaging with the industry did not understand that terminal and pipeline operators could not assist with allocation of supply because they did not own the product themselves. And so that created, that lack of knowledge created the frustration in terms of trying to deal with the response. So clearly knowledge of how the industry works and the implications of supply chains are helpful when dealing with an emergency situation. Another key finding is around situational awareness and improvements of that. Communication channels were unclear during events, and critical agencies like the EIA, which have a fundamental role in gathering information for situation awareness, were sometimes hampered by on timing by the limits imposed by such things as the Paperwork Reduction Act. Effective communications was also a challenge during events, in fact, in part to the segmentation of the industry. As we all know, due to the evolution of the industry, there are now a very wide variety of owners across the supply chain, and that makes it difficult to have a small number of entry points to the industry from the DOE and state governments. In addition, sustainability is key. There's a large turnover of staff, both within industry and governments, and there is a relative infrequency of these events. So without a sustained process, institutional knowledge and capability will be lost. And lastly, as Marvin talked about, leadership commitment to driving that sustainability and ensuring the resources and budgets to make this happen is critical, both from an industry perspective and from the government. So these findings form the basis of our recommendations. And based on these findings, it was clear that there was a need for DOE and industry to institutionalize a system to foster continuous improvement. So let me now go to the study recommendations. And as you will see in the recommendations, this report drives action. It does not conclude action. These recommendations set the foundation for building a sustainable process with continuous improvement. These recommendations are aligned with proven strategies to increase energy system resilience to storms and other potential disruptions by enhancing preparedness and response and speeding recovery. The recommendations fall into two categories. The first focuses on establishing the operational frameworks that are appropriately staffed and resources, and the second focuses on sustaining the process. The following slides will look at the study recommendations in a bit more depth. The first three recommendations lay the foundation for use of a common system. The National Response Framework provides the framework for how the nation should respond to all types of disasters and emergencies. The National Incident Management System, or NIMS, provides a comprehensive national approach to incident management. And one of the most important elements incorporated into NIMS is the Incident Command Structure, or ICS, a standard, on-scene, all-hazards incident management system. The ICS has been adopted by NIMS as the standard incident organizational structure, and it's been demonstrated to be effective in managing supply chain disruption, regardless of cause, scale, location, or complexity. So the first recommendation is around harmonizing DOE's energy response team structure with that NIMS incident command system, which will improve communication between agencies and with the private sector. ICS will work for small events as well as Stafford Act events. And this recommendation is the cornerstone for all subsequent recommendations. We have seen a lot of work within the DOE, and there's a clear demonstration of speed and urgency to tackle this. Under the ICS structure, the Situation Unit is responsible for collection, evaluation, and dissemination of incident information. So during normal events, the EIA is the primary contact to industry for information. They know the supply chains, and the study team recognized that their support is extremely valuable during response efforts and should be formalized within the energy response team. The last recommendation, what will be important for use of a common system, is the establishment of company liaisons. This role will be essential as it will provide a channel for the DOE to get information from the companies in order to conduct analysis and develop that situational awareness. We should not underestimate what it will take for the industry to put these liaisons in place. It's important to note that the primary information exchange should follow the bottom-up approach designed into the ICS frameworks, which reinforces that incident response ultimately occurs at a local level. That being said, we recognize the desire of the Department of Energy to request leaders of companies to participate in group emergency meetings if needed, and provisions will be made to facilitate that request in advance of an emergency. This next slide is just a graphic that shows the National Response Framework, and what you see here is how these three recommendations fit within the National Response Framework, utilizing the NIMS ICS. So the study, as Marvin noted, by its nature, focused at the higher levels of federal and state coordination with industry, and that focuses on issues management that then supports incident management at the local level. So establishing, harmonizing the DOE energy response team within that NIMS framework is recommendation number one. Establishing EIA as a formal member and participant under the Situation Unit lead, and establishing the right contact levels within industry for the federal and state governments. Moving on, when these events happen, there is a need to quickly restore fuel supplies, and to do this, the industry may request temporary regulatory relief. That may include use of fuel supply from other regions, alternate modes of transport, or changing of supply routes. This study recommends use of a template for use by government and offers some specific recommendations for improving waiver processes. The need for temporary regulatory relief is very time sensitive. The time that it takes to issue a waiver and the specified duration of the waiver are important criteria for response. And of key importance is the need to match the regulatory relief time frame with the supply chain response time. Regulatory relief often comes when the impact is already seen in the city or state, even though it can be seen or predicted 4 or 5 days out that regulatory relief will be needed. As an example, again, a Gulf Coast hurricane affecting main pipelines to the East Coast, resulting in supply shortages up the East Coast. When those events happen, we can predict that supply shortages will occur out in time, and regulatory relief is needed in a more certain time frame, rather than waiting for that impact to be felt before the regulatory relief is given. Certainty regarding the regulations being waived and the extent of the waiver are also important. Uncertainty sometimes results in delay and missed opportunities. Moving to the recommendations that support sustaining the process, we recognize that energy assurance plans are the mechanisms for states and localities to plan for and respond to incidents involving the energy sector. State energy assurance plans and the industry business continuity plans need to address vulnerabilities and interdependencies. It's imperative that these programs be staffed and resourced in order to achieve a robust program at the local and state levels. And as with the other recommendations in this category, this will require leadership commitment. Continuing with the recommendations for ongoing actions required for sustainability, we are recommending that the DOE and states establish routine education and training programs and improve their comprehensive drill and exercise programs. There is a key role for industry in support of both these recommendations. First, the industry will enhance and maintain the oil and natural gas industry preparedness handbook that we recommend the government use as a key reference. Second, the industry is committed to inviting DOE to participate in industry-led drills and exercises and participating in DOE-led drills. There are further details of cooperation between the industry and DOE included in the implementation plan. So let me now go to that. As I stated earlier, implementing the study recommendations will build upon the progress already underway in advancing DOE's emergency response capability. The government and industry share a commitment to prepare for and respond to energy supply disruptions, and that shared commitment is reflected in the implementation plan shown here. The NPC and DOE leadership anticipate that the recommendations will start to be implemented in advance of the 2015 hurricane season. And there are plans to conduct a joint exercise in 2015 to test key recommendations of the study. So we are working to staff a group that will work with the DOE to continue to address the implementation plan. And I would now like to just ask Keith Robeson to say a few words about requests that will be coming to you as members of the NPC and requests to the trade associations for staff resources to support some of this work. Keith?
I'll keep it away from my deep voice here, reverb on you. Appreciate the intro, Peggy. I was really happy to hear Marvin's comments early on about support and participation, as we move forward. And those of us in the study committee have said that the easy work's done, now the hard work begins. Quite frankly, implementation plan is what it's all about. I think there's going to be plenty of work to go around. As I sat and looked through the implementation plan, I really see, at this point, I see three key areas, the three areas of expertise I think that we're probably going to need some additional resources and support to work through the implementation plan. For me, those are probably people with some crisis management expertise. I think probably some people with supply chain expertise, and probably maybe even some public affairs folks. Those are sort of the resources I see that we're looking for right now to go forward. I think legal would be one thing people would think maybe we need, but I think we have some legal support that's probably adequate. I think as we go forward, I see really two modes, I think, that we're looking for. One would be in the ONGSCC. We have an emergency management working group. We may take some additional resources to provide into that working group and establish a working group underneath that. We'll see how that works. And I think there's going to be a role, I'll call it on an ad hoc basis, if you will. Some of the education and training opportunities are going to come up. I'm not sure there's a need to establish a real working group for that, but have people available at request, obviously with enough prior notice to do that, but participate in those kinds of operations. So I think that's where we're going to go with the thing. I guess, our request here is if you have people in those skill sets that you're willing to offer up, to participate with us moving forward, I think we can probably, if you get those names to Marshall, Nichols, I think get them to Marshall, Marshall get them to us, and we can start to develop those resources and skill sets and where we need those available. So I think that's it, Peggy.
Can you hear me? Okay, all right. So anyway, we'll be, we're looking for those resources. Please give the names to Marshall, and if we don't get enough, we'll come tap people on some shoulders. So with that, Marvin, that's the study report and recommendations. I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Peggy. Why don't you hang on just one
Great job.
second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, and to the entire team for really a terrific job. I wonder, Mr. Chair, should we just pause here for see if there's any comments or questions?
Yeah, I'd like to open it up for questions, but first, Marvin moved that the NPC approve this, so if I could have a second, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. We got a second? Okay. I'll turn it over to you for some questions and comments.
Memory in the back, then we'll come up.
Well, thank you. I'd like to suggest two ways to strengthen this very useful report's goals by harnessing interactions across its understandably narrow boundaries. First, as my brittle power synthesis for DoD noted back in '81, the most bounce per buck comes from efficient end use. For example, the uncompromised 125 to 240 mile a gallon ultralight autos that were excluded from our transportation study but have since entered the market could run 4 to 8 times longer on their half-full fuel tanks than today's cars can. So such efficient vehicles' distributed fuel inventories could buy precious time for the supply chain to fix what's broken or to improvise new supplies. And similarly, efficient buildings and factories can stretch existing natural gas storage and thus buy time to mitigate supply-side disruption. So I think we need to bear this missing time dimension in mind. Second, this report understandably considers only natural disasters, not malicious disruption, which can be far more serious. In brittle power, we found that a handful of people could shut off 3/4 of the oil and gas to the eastern states in an evening without leaving Louisiana. I'm most concerned about the hydrocarbon supply chain's strong dependence on even more vulnerable grid electricity, which remains under threat from physical attacks like Metcalf, cyber attack, and solar storms. About 2/3 of U.S. utilities have not yet launched a serious response. They're too busy arguing that somebody else should pay to protect their customers, their revenues, and their peace of national security. In the Defense Science Board panel, where the gravity of the cyber threat emerged in '06, the late Jim Schlesinger and Jim Woolsey both urged, and I agreed, that decisive DOE or DOD action under the Defense Production Act would be a good way to fix these grave deficiencies in the power system with due urgency, rather than losing another 8 years. So making America's power system resilient would be very much in the interest of the oil and gas industries, and I hope that MPC members will consider supporting it so our nation's electric vulnerabilities don't stop them from producing, treating, transporting, and selling their own vital products. Thank you.
Thanks, Amory. And it's not surprising to me that your comments were really more expansive than what we actually covered in the study. I take your comments seriously. I think from particularly the point of view around we only address natural disasters, there's a very strong feeling I think I can express on behalf of the team that this structure and getting this backbone in place of this response methodology, this communication path, smoothing that piece, actually then sets us up for further improvements in the overall system. But without that in place first, it's very difficult to make the other improvements, and that's really the focus of this first important step. I think you've also highlighted a number of potential improvements to the energy system, infrastructure, and so forth, which again I would see as later stages, and particularly or possibly other studies from MPC. Peggy, anything you want to add to that? Okay. Other comments? Yes, sir. Then we're on the front row.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very helpful report and for your team's report. I have a different issue, and that is, would it be possible for the study to say something about the linkage of your results for international application? First of all, in the case of North America, natural disasters are a problem for our whole community. But more importantly, many of our closest countries with which we cooperate on energy face similar issues, and what your study has done should at least mention the linkage. I wouldn't suggest any enormous work on this, but mention the linkage and the use it could have to other countries who will look to us for leadership.
Right. Thank you very much. I think, because there is obviously an interdependence between some particular countries, of course, and take that on advice. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Steve Hightower with Hightower's Petroleum. And one of the things that I noticed during the process is at the end of the supply chain is the independent suppliers, the distributors. And I think that there's that involvement, while it was asked towards the end, I think that we have a lot of experiences and input because we're the boots on the ground. And I think that it would be beneficial to have our input more in the higher level input, and being a part of the staff resources, I think would be helpful in some of the thought process as well.
Okay. Steve, thanks very much for the comments, and I think that's one of the things that we can think about how we would incorporate into this drill system and start to really get clearer about how the, closer to the front line, how that really works and what we need to do to improve the system. So thank you. Other comments? I think we're there.
All right. See if we can't pull this together.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Thanks again, Peggy.
Well, thank you very much. We do have a motion and a second to adopt the proposed final report of the NPC Committee on Emergency Preparedness, and I know that Marvin and Peggy have noted some of the comments here, many of which will be thought about as we implement this, as well as I heard a couple of ideas that may be candidates for future study as well. So with that, I would like to call this to vote, and for all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Do we have any opposed? Great. Well, the report is adopted without objection. And I have to say, first of all, thank you, Marvin, your vice chairs, members of the committee. Once again, an example of a great job. A number of you, your organizations were involved as well as a multitude of volunteers. And I would also say that I heard the word commitment over and over from both Marvin and Peggy, because this report is, I think, a bit different than some of the ones that we've produced in recent years, because versus some of the studies that were all about, really building an understanding and then communicating that understanding on the state of certain issues, this requires us to join with the Department of Energy and other agencies and other organizations that are involved to be prepared. And that means that we're going to have to work through the implementation recommendations of this, because we know that, unfortunately, disasters will occur, and the ability of our collective government and industry being able to respond will have a tremendous and positive impact on the lives of those that are being impacted by these disasters. So this is a great report. I think it's a great example of the types of things that this organization can do. And again, Marvin, congratulations on bringing this to conclusion. Mr. Secretary, it's with great pleasure that the National Petroleum Council submits this report to you. As we all heard, the effort that went into this study was extensive and thorough, and we had great input from literally hundreds of individuals and organizations. And we're particularly grateful to you, Mr. Secretary, and the current and former Deputy Secretaries, Adam Szymanski, for the cooperation and support that's been provided from DOE, EIA, and other governmental agencies in helping us to prepare this. And we look forward to sharing these results with you. We also look forward to carrying out the implementation of this program as well. Which brings us to the next agenda item. Again, thank you so much. I know that was a very thorough report, but it's important that everyone understand that, and I appreciate the comments and thought that went into it.